everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm not the only one speaking today, so I'm going to present my colleagues just in a while. But before this, let me do a brief introduction of why we're here, what is this, and to make it the most reliable and engaged as possible, because we're launching an official document. And sometimes a document is like, yes, a paper is a document. Why do we do this? Or why do we keep doing this if we're exactly talking about cutting the red tape? So my name is Carolina Rossi. I'm the head of network and strategy at ESNA, and this is actually what brings us here. What is ESNA? And most of all, or most important, what is our mission or why we exist? So ESNA exists because we came up to unite Europe in a way that is slightly different, because our focus is startups and scale-ups. Startups and scale-up regarding the startup ecosystem, regarding making it friendly, regarding making it easy for us to create a company, raise money, access to capital, and eventually, therefore, do something that we have already here this morning here in this stage, make Europe more competitiveness, to increase competitiveness of Europe, especially in the times of today. To make this happen, ESNA officially was created in 2021. It is run from Lisbon, Portugal today. And the interesting, and I think one of the most fabulous things of it, is that it's an initiative that I think should be recognized worldwide, not just Europe, because it comes after a political mandate. A political mandate of 28 states, a political mandate, therefore, 28 countries of Europe, which united for the same goal. And our goal, as I said before, was to make the startup and scale-up ecosystem friendly. We have always, or we usually compare ourselves to the United States. It's slightly different. We're going to discuss about this in the panel. I'm not going to go deep into it, but I want to go deep into what do we do. And to understand what do we do is also important who does it. So I come from the tech world. I'm a founder. I'm an investor myself in 8 companies, and today I'm making policy. So I was here, and now I'm here, trying to support policy making. Me, with my team, with ESNA, and with advisory board members, which are here today with us. We do many initiatives, and one of them was done last year. It was Envision the Future, and it's called the ESNA Compendium. It's a storytelling, it's a positive narrative of Europe, and therefore, one of the main objectives for us is to tell the story in another way. But to tell the story also in a practical matter, to understand where do we need to trigger, what do we need to do better. And one of these is, of course, red tape or regulatory barriers. I mean, things we need to change, things we need to change now, but also in a gradual way, also through effort, but also into an incremental effort. We don't do this alone, we need experts. I'm pointing here. We need experts to make this happen, and that expertise come by different ways. We talk directly to the countries. We talk directly to our member states to understand the policies, the national policies, but we also talk to the voice of the market, which in this case is representative in this panel. And to make this happen, we try to create a document, which is something that you may know that the Commission usually likes. But we do it in the most practical way, so then we actually deliver tools, and we do it deep. Today, we're here launching our document, which is called a red tape document or regulatory barriers. It is a document which is very practical, which our idea is to envision, to support and accelerate some changes. And I will use accelerate because it's not from one day to another, but it's something that can happen. And we're going to focus in 2 main points. The most relevant one is the 20-year regime. The 20-year regime, maybe you have heard about it. The 20-year regimes come from, it's called 28 because we're 27 countries in Europe, so the 28 will be a broad EU-wide way to run a company and operate in a higher level in Europe to eventually become a single market. We also elaborate deeply in the document in public procurement, something that probably many of you have already lived, and that we will also talk about this in the Baltics specifically, because I think that you guys have an excellent example of how things can be more digital and things are going right. But then, this is me talking, but now I'm gonna bring to the board also our expert to talk about more deeply in the panel. And here I have Egle, so please raise an applause to Egle Markivicius.
Better.
And Luis Rocchetti. please. So then we give that energy up. And I'm going to do something. We needed to do an introduction so then you all know what we're talking about. And then we're going to go deeper in the topic. And I know that there may also be some question eventually of the audience, but we have already started a conversation today and during this time. And I will start with the first question. Why the 28 regime is important? And if anyone of here doesn't really have not heard yet about the 28 regime, what it is. Well, I said that we call it 28 because we have 27 countries. This will be like that big one to become a single market. But can you elaborate about it? And I will start with Luis.
Of course. So hello, everyone. So the 28th regime is basically a regime, a pan-European, EU-wide regime that has had some manifestations in the past, and we wanted to make sure that we do it better in the future. The rationale behind the 28th regime is, I would say, mimicking what the US has in Delaware corporate law, where we would have a regime, a corporate regime that would apply across the the EU region. The positive externalities of it are immense, I would say. I'm a corporate lawyer. I've closed funding rounds for startups in 17 jurisdictions, all of which are very different. And so I think if we manage to level the playing field at the EU level so that we get a single point of entry, a corporate point of entry, we're going to, basically the first externality is going to be that the US investors will no longer say, I don't invest in this country or that country. That will be a bit irrelevant, and that's important for the fundraising to come. Secondly, we can have EU-wide investment documentation like you have under the National Venture Capital Association in the United States or the British Venture Capital Association in the UK. And I think that streamlines the fundraising and raises the bar for everyone. If we can level the playing field in the EU, then you can make the countries compete against themselves and raise the bar for everyone.
Perfect. In that sense, I would love to bring the question to you, Egil, but also with a more deeper angle in where we are today, right? We're in Tallinn, we're Estonia, one of the Baltics, you're from Lithuania, so it would be great to also listen to your view with this sensitivity.
Being here in Estonia feels like I'm at home. It's a little bit colder here. Things are a little bit different, but not that much. And as someone coming from the Baltics, it's easy to be very proud of our ecosystems. We are small nations. We have small markets. Therefore, our founders, our startups, our scale-ups are always looking out to the global scene. They're always focusing on the US and other big markets without much focus on the EU unless they scale enough and have enough of resources to adapt and comply with fragmented regulations across the EU. Of course, every story is different. However, as people who border not very good neighbors in the East, we are also interested to see Europe to be strong, not only security-wise, but economically. Those are two interconnected areas. So if the 28th regime, despite the differences, despite the political differences in the levels of harmonization we would like to see across EU member states, or the level playing field, as you told, if we could create a system that helps at least some startups and scale-ups in the European Union to choose Europe over other continents of the world, we've already won. And last but not least, I would like to reiterate that I do not agree with a full-scale harmonization of rules across the EU. I do think countries like the Baltics, like Lithuania or Estonia, have certain competitive advantages that they have to keep in order to be competitive on both the European and global level. However, the 28th regime is a step in the right direction that we have to look into not only from an economic or policy perspective, but from a broader geopolitical perspective.
Perfect. You use the word strong, interconnected, then also now that is a step to a process. And I want to go back to 2004 because I'm going to say that it's not the first time. I'm looking at Luis that we tried this. There was a trial called Sociedad Europeas. Can you elaborate a little about it, or maybe administrative, legally, culturally, what we can learn from what happened then?
Well, in startup land, we always say that we learn from mistakes, and we failed miserably in 2004. I think the overall intention in 2004 was to do the 28th regime and do what's called a European company, and an SC for short. So the SCs failed miserably. The requirements, the administrative requirements for you to be an SC are not directed at startups, are mainly directed at scale-ups, and you need to have activity in 2 countries, you need to have 120K of initial share capital, and basically what happened was the only country where it had, I'm going to say, relative adoption was Germany, and it was for all the wrong reasons. Okay? It was not because it was a good idea or it was good implementation. It's a good idea, but badly implemented. In Germany, the reason why we have so many SCs, and this is big companies, I would say, it's because if you go past a certain volume, a certain scale in Germany, you have to have employees in the supervisory board. If you convert to an SC, you no longer have that requirement. So it's for all the wrong reasons. We wouldn't want the 28th regime to fall on the same, well, I would say, mishap in implementation. We have to make sure that we get things right. We have a lot of experience in getting things wrong. We could learn from that. And I think we're at the right time. I'm going to say something politically incorrect, but I'm going to say it anyway. I'm a lawyer, so I'm okay. I think that I've never sensed a sense of urgency in Europe as I feel now. And I think we have Trump to thank for that. And if there's any good coming out of that, let's have that we can effectively level the playing field and harmonize in Europe, and not full scale, because otherwise it's unmanageable. But at least get to a level playing field where we can actually interoperate in Europe and get a big enough block to remain relevant. Otherwise, we're going to go into oblivion. And I think this is pretty clear for everyone now. So if there's anything good coming out of Trump, and there's a few things, but I won't get into that. For European countries, the sense of urgency should not be lost. And if we get a chance to federalize a bit more, at least at the corporate stage, I think we should grab that with 3 arms.
Perfect. I'm gonna take the case that I like to, that we can try to make cases. You talk about a slight level of federalization, the United States. If we go back, England, to your experience, also very related to public affairs and public in general administration in general in Lithuania. I know that you are also very near the startup community. You know many founders, some of them are unicorns. What do you think should change? Are they actually participating? Should they participate more for this kind of debate to happen?
Well, I'm a frequent traveler to Brussels, much more than I would like to. And each time I visit an office of a member of European Parliament or an assistant, I increasingly frequently hear that the Lithuanians or the Baltic representatives have already been there before me, which makes me very optimistic. However, still, the representation of our founders in EU policy making is clearly not enough. A very practical example. A few months ago, the European Commission has started a consultation on the startup and scale-up strategy, which outlines the 28th regime, a lot of other things that are supposed to help startups and scale-ups. And the participation from the Baltic states, including the Central Eastern Europe, was, with the exceptions of some countries like Poland, was very modest. It's easy to be unhappy about the situation, but decisions are made by those who show up. And I think our startup and scale-up and unicorns are wealthy and prepared enough to be active and outspoken participants in EU-level policy making, making sure that our position is also heard. So that's my main message. Please be more active. Please attend the meetings. Please take time and look at the Have Your Say page and participate in all of the consultations, even though they seem quite similar and sometimes you don't have time for that. But the European Commission is willing to listen, at least it seems so right now. It's important to manage our expectations, of course. Looking at the simplification efforts, the efforts to cut red tape, etc. Sometimes the communication in the media is very ambitious. We've all heard statements like the GDPR will be slashed, the AI Act will be reviewed, some other things. The European Commission doesn't want to reopen some of these regulations for now because they're afraid of opening a Pandora box that will block their other actions for the next 2 to 3 years. My personal opinion, we still need to do it at least to some extent. But then the founders, the tech people, the startup representatives read these messages on media, and they think it's going to happen, and at the end of the day, it doesn't happen, and at the end of the day, everyone's unhappy. So we have to manage our expectations and understand that the European Commission and European Union in general is a complex mechanism. We are sometimes hostages of our own legal system, where we have to codify everything, agree on everything between 27 countries and with sometimes very different positions. And European Union, in European Union, move fast and break things doesn't always work. Nevertheless, we have to participate, we have to stay patient, and we have to contribute to making the EU and making the business environment, that's a term that everybody seems to be forgetting nowadays, better.
Mm-hmm. In that point of either making the environment better or how do we think, I'm going to go into another topic, which is basically this entrepreneurial behavior. How do European founders act? How much time they allocate for this kind of issue, which you just put an example into this. And this also maybe is managed or somehow influenced by the media that you just mentioned. And I'm putting this because we are trying to really, really focus in a positive narrative of Europe. And I'm going to go back to Liz for this question. How useful, how important is it that it starts from us, this positive narrative, this pointing out the positive thing that Europe does? We have talked slightly about it, and I would like to listen to your opinion about this.
Thank you. I would like to start with a small comment. This is going to sound weird for the lawyer to be the optimistic in the room, okay? Just so we get it out of. But I've never been as bullish as I am of Europe today. Now, that statement needs to be put into perspective, because I was never very bullish of Europe generally, but now I am moderately bullish if we get things right. And I think, going to Hegel's point, we can't change the world and we can't change Europe from one day to the other. But given that we have been incrementally, we have like 9 EU directives on company law, we have the European company in 2004, and we have 21 years of the regime, I think there's a lot that can be incrementally, not from a disruption perspective, but incrementally made better. With that, I think we're losing the big picture, and we're not, again, comparing apples with apples. If we take what Europe has done well, and well doesn't mean that we cannot do better, okay? But if we take what Europe has done well and we think about it, if we think about MiFID or in financial services, when you can passport your financial services license across Europe, when you get licensed on one state and do it across Europe, that's way better than you have in the US in the financial sector. When we had MiCA in blockchain, everyone was complaining about MiCA and how it killed stablecoins, and people were right. It has to be tweaked on stablecoins and a few other matters. But when I went to Wharton in October last year, behind closed doors in a crypto-only event, I only heard everyone say, we need a MiCA. That's not what we hear in the news. So when I go to and talk to, for instance, people, founders in ed tech, and they tell me that the US is 50 states in terms of education, it's a patchwork, and you cannot scale across the US because of that, that's an issue. And so I think The level of harmonization can be done at a corporate level, as you were saying. I don't think it can be done on tax, on labor, and stock options is a bit of another topic. But I do think that we're getting a lot of things right. If we think about even GDPR is the gold standard, and actually like the data regulation in California kind of mimics what we had in GDPR, save for the outliers, which are the ones that make for headlines. And I think that's the problem. But having said that, there's room for improvement. But if you take MiFID on financial services, GDPR on data, the AI Act, which obviously can be improved, but also basically what we were discussing this about the moratorium at the state level in AI in the US. People are asking for a moratorium to stop having state-level legislation for AI and to do it on a federal level as well. If you take the NIS directive on cybersecurity, and basically there's a lot of harmonization via regulation in Europe that we're doing effectively well. I'm not a very big fan of federalizing via regulation, okay? I'm not saying it's the best approach, but we're doing something well. What we're not doing well is stopping the Europe bashing, and that gets on my nerves. The US has a lot of problems, but they sell themselves very, very well. I remember when I went to I worked in London right before Brexit, and I worked for Skadden Arps, a US law firm. Brexit was a no-brainer. Nothing would change. Everything was fine and dandy, except it was not, right? And everyone is saying, and I think in the US, you always get that, like, basically, if I go, like I was in another event called Select USA, where I had 7 states competing for one another to get like industries from Portugal, like new factories, new plants invested into states in the US. They were all competing against one another, but they have a level playing field. Everyone knows that you're going to incorporate in Delaware, and you're going to have roughly the same corporate structure, but then you compete on tax. Texas, for instance, competes on tax against everyone. And then you go to Nevada, and Nevada says, yeah, it's best, corporate law is better here, but they have 70-ish, 80-ish% harmonized. That's where we want to get to. And when we get there, please stop the European bashing, because it's unfounded.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for the words. Engle, we're here today, and the 3 of us are united because of a specific process that we're working together, which happened to be this red tape volume or regulatory barriers volume, right? That we're working together to cut some red tape. In that sense, we have also talked about this slightly, is how do we convince, if they need to be convinced, because maybe here I'm wrong, people from the Baltic specifically, that this is really important. Because I'm also Italian, and I can tell you that it is not that easy to open or run a company in Italy as it is, for example, in Estonia. It's not that digitalized, so there are some barriers. So how do we become more, how you say, companion with other European citizens to be like, you know what, we need to be all together, so then this process actually happen, taking the best practice that we have in many of the Baltic countries?
Once again, we're right to be proud of our ecosystems. Our ecosystems have been punching above their weight for a long time now. And we could technically continue as we are for the upcoming years without changing anything. However, we have to be aware of the political developments, not only within the EU, but also across the world, and the line of thought that the European Union and the European Commission is taking right now. There's a willingness to make sure that European money, first of all, doesn't sit in the bank accounts of European banks, which the banks are very happy about, but that does not generate additional value for the economy. The European Union doesn't want the European citizen savings to go only to the US stock markets. So this is another big topic, savings and investment union, and how to make sure that the European money stays in Europe and we create a system to support our innovators. However, in general, us in the Baltics, as I said before, we could continue as we are, but we have to stick to the reality and see where the EU is going to. And we have to participate and make sure our voice is being heard. At the end of the day, European economic strength translates into European security. And probably nobody in the audience would disagree that on the Maslow pyramid, that's our absolute priority.
Yeah. If I may, Caro, sorry. I think you're absolutely spot on, Egil. There's one thing where we're doing very, very badly, I would say, which is having the fragmented capital markets that we do have is hurting us massively. That is something where we have regulatory level playing field, and there's something still missing. And we need to get that right. We need to get that right really fast.
Perfect. If I go more into a detailed level, especially thinking of what are our main recommendations, public procurement is one of the main topics, right? We talk about the 28 regime, but we also have public procurement. That said, we're proposing some reforms, some priorities, to be pushed forward. And in that angle, you have been extremely supported either in the design of a possible startup track or other ideas to support a startup to access to public money. This is what we mean, or to big public basic challenges that sometimes are just provided to big corps. How do we open this to everyone? Can you elaborate a little about these topics?
Just a little bit of a background story. Now in the EU and across the world, we're very much focused on international trade, on the monetary and non-monetary tariffs coined by President Trump. But we do have a lot of internal barriers within the EU. And the single market for public procurement doesn't exist. I was told by some of my former Estonian colleagues that Estonia, Finland, and some other English-speaking countries in the EU publish their public procurement bids for IT, for example, in English. But this doesn't happen in other parts of Europe due to cultural reasons, bureaucratic reasons, etc. And our ecosystems are very closed down, very protectionist, very, not eager to compete with other providers from across the world. So that's a very practical example. Of course, the question is a lot bigger. How do we make sure that small companies, startups, scale-ups become part of public procurement ecosystems? Across the EU, depending on the level of government spending, public procurement amounts to around 40 to 15% of GDP. That's a lot of money. And we do see in some sectors like digital sector that the projects, the digital transformation projects are being implemented in much slower way than it's supposed to be, really bringing negative effects for the states and so on and so forth. So having startups, scale-ups participate more often in public procurement ecosystem would have a lot of benefits for everyone. Of course, we have a lot of ideas on a pan-European level in the compendium, but even on a national level, agencies that are responsible for public procurement should make sure that they provide some sort of consultancy and support for companies, startups, and people that normally are not participating just due to bureaucracy and high levels of high level of entry.
To start to close.
Yeah.
We started with a positive narrative. I want to continue the positive narrative, adding a vision of the future. So how do you each, I'm going to start with Luis, envision, if what we're talking here actually takes place, is implemented, you use the word Luis, implemented, how do you see Europe in the next 5 to 10 years, and how relevant is it for the audience here, which we are in tech, startup, scale-up ecosystem?
So if I could try to envisage the future in 5 to 10 years in Europe, if we get implementation right, and that's a big if, but if we get implementation right, I would see us having, on the fundraising space, we would have investment documentation standardized, which is something that is insanely helpful in getting efficient deployment of cash, okay? Also, if we can get the rest of the world comfortable with one single 28th regime entity, you'll start having scale of the investments, and you're going to have start money flowing in, as opposed to you having to flip to the US to raise money in the US, which is always the case. I do believe that if we get things right, you're going to have a 400 million block that can actually compete with the other two blocks. And we need to get there. We need to get there, because otherwise, again, I'm going to say something which is probably not wise to say, but I'm going to say we're going to be a tourist attraction and we're not going to be relevant. And I think nobody wants that.
Perfect.
As a true Lithuanian, I love to think in dystopian parameters. What happens if we don't do that? As you said before, we're going to stay irrelevant. Our gap between us and the US and China will be increasing. It will be very hard to reverse. We, as a continent, as a union, we do have some geographical, geopolitical, political challenges that other countries do not have. So with this mix and with this formula, without moving forward in making the environment better for our startups and scale-ups, we're going to lose.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Luis Roquete. Thank you very much, Engle Markiewicz, Jutta, and I said it right. Thank you for joining. Thank you for the support. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We invite you to download the ESNA volume of Red Tape or Regulatory Barrier. We really hope it is of value for the whole ecosystem, and they were moving step by step with gradual effort, right? No, incremental effort, gradual effort to achieve what we want. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Latitude.
Thank you.